Leading off our discussion tonight, our Ambassador Wendy Sherman, former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the Obama administration. She's an MSNBC Global Affairs contributor. Mika Oyang is with us. She's a former staff member of the House Intelligence Committee. And Evelyn Farkas, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration and a former staff member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. She also served on the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee for 7 years. She's an MSNBC national security analyst. And Ambassador Sherman, let me start with you. What is your reaction to what we're discovering in these transcripts today?
I must say, Lawrence, flipping through the 500 pages and reading the summaries that you were referring to, I could just feel my blood boiling, getting angrier and angrier. The president talks all the time about the deep state, but these are the deepest of patriots. Masha Yovanovitch and Mike McKinley, Phil Reeker, these folks who are coming forward, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, they are trying to uphold the oath they took to the Constitution. And here we have people who are undermining them right and left. And who is at the bottom of all of that? The President of the United States. Masha Yovanovitch didn't know why Carol Perez, the Director General, was asking her to come home. And neither did Carol Perez. And again, when she asked whether there might be some support, when Mike McKinley asked Secretary Pompeo for support, basically the message that came forward was this would only make things worse, that the President of the United States might tweet something out that would undermine that support and put Masha more at risk. This is not what we should be doing. We should be defending diplomats, not undermining them.
Mika Oyang, you've been in that room with the door closed when there's no cameras, and some of the people who are performers for the cameras are very different people with the door closed. But these transcripts are really stunning. When it comes to players like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, they don't attempt anything in these depositions. None of those moves that they play for the cameras. And most importantly, no defense of Donald Trump. There isn't a defense of Donald Trump. There isn't anything helpful for Donald Trump anywhere in these transcripts offered by any of the Republicans in the room, including the Republican staff.
That's right. And you don't see them tipping their hand to any kind of defense strategy. It really shows the advantage that the Democrats have had in holding these hearings behind closed doors. My experience in closed-door hearings is actually members do a much better job of trying to get to the truth because they're not playing for the audience beyond the cameras. And so they are actually much more thoughtful here. But if Jordan and Meadows thought there was any defense that they could make, they would be trying to elicit that from these witnesses. And one of the things that really struck me about this transcript is when Ambassador McKinley says in his 37 years in the Foreign Service, he's never seen anything like this. So for all of those defenders of the president who keep trying to argue that all presidents do this and what he's done is no different than anyone else, actually the people who have done this for their entire careers say that is not true. This is very different. No president has ever tried to dig up dirt on a political opponent and tried to use the U.S. government to be able to do so.
Evelyn, there's a picture that emerges in Ambassador Yovanovitch's testimony about what she was going through, but it's also a picture of what Ukraine was going through. Ukraine is communicating with her, and officials telling her, you got to watch your back because Giuliani's here and he's got these guys with him and they're talking about you. And Ukraine obviously was stuck in a position that must have been extremely and continues to be extremely difficult for them to navigate while they're trying to fight off the Russians.
Right. I mean, here's the thing. Going back to the testimony of Ambassador Taylor, remember, Lawrence, he said Ukraine is treated as a subject and an object. And when it's the subject of American attempts to manipulate it and to get it to help with political malfeasance in this case, it's really difficult for Ukraine because they rely on American support, which means political support. And the professionals, of course, are doing the bidding of the politicals. And the Ukrainians understand what's happening. I mean, they're not blind to this. And it must have been somewhat embarrassing, actually, for Ambassador Yovanovitch. I mean, I want to make a point here also just to kind of emphasize what my colleagues just said, Ambassador Sherman and Mika Oyang. These are Foreign Service officers. They're like military service officers, right? They don't have political badges. They're supposed to, just carry out the policy of the United States, irrespective of who the president is. And I think this point seems to have been lost on President Trump, Gordon Sondland, and others. But Secretary Pompeo, it should not be lost on him. That man is a military, former military officer. He should know better. He was a member of Congress. And that actually really bothers me, that he let these people get yanked into this really horrible situation where they were getting involved in nefarious acts. And then, of course, in the case of Ambassador Yovanovitch, she paid the price in terms of her career.
Well, if we believe Mike McKinley's testimony that he talked to Mike Pompeo about this 3 times, then what we saw Mike Pompeo do on television is lie in a classic Trump style, public lying about saying, no such conversation ever occurred. Wendy Sherman, I can't think of the last time a Secretary of State has been publicly in a position like that.
I think it's really quite extraordinary and, quite frankly, so more than disrespectful to all of these patriots, all of these public servants. It really does look like Secretary Pompeo is more interested in being in Kansas and considering a Senate race in Kansas than he is the national security of the United States. Ambassador Yovanovitch, in her testimony, also talked about the implications of all of this around the world. Who are other leaders supposed to think makes the decisions? Is it the official policy of the United States, or is it some unofficial gang that is running a number set out by the President of the United States? What's this do to the credibility and reliability of ambassadors all over the world who are public servants, not political appointees? Do they come with credibility? Do they come with reliability? So this kind of behavior by Secretary Pompeo not only has undermined these great public servants, but has really put our national security at risk all over the world.
Mika Owyang, there is a report tonight from CBS that the Republicans are considering moving Jim Jordan onto the Intelligence Committee in time for the public hearings that the Intelligence Committee will have, presumably so he can try his bomb-tossing tactics on that committee. Of course, that means someone has to be moved off to make the room for him. But what do you make of that strategy?
Well, it's very clear that with a limited number of people, they're going to want people who are playing to the president for these open hearings in front of the press. There are a number of members on the committee who are actually very thoughtful about what the national security interest is of the United States, even on the Republican side. People like Congressman Will Hurd, who was a former CIA officer, people like Congressman Conway, who was a former auditor. There are people who are actually much more thoughtful and balanced on these things. And I think it's likely that they will try and move someone off to make room for Jim Jordan. The real question is whether or not they move off the ranking member, Devin Nunes, who has, by all accounts, not been particularly effective or helpful in these closed-door questions.
And Evelyn, the idea that Jim Jordan has something to contribute to the public hearings after having absolutely nothing to contribute to the private hearings, the private depositions that are now public, is just another indication that there is no defense. I mean, if a defense develops, it's going to be something that happens down the road. But as of tonight, as sitting here tonight, there is no defense of the president in the House of Representatives so far.
Right. I mean, Lawrence, so far there's been a lot of noise and, sound and fury, basically criticism of the process. You can expect that to continue, even though I believe the Democrats addressed this in passing legislation that set down the rules of the road, which appear to be quite fair to the minority, to the Republicans, and to the president. But they'll probably continue to yell about process and anything else they can. But you're right. They can't defend the president. We have the transcript of the call. And the president himself, keeps talking about the whistleblower. We are so beyond the whistleblower. Here are real actual people who are going to be sitting there, completely uncovered to the public, corroborating everything the whistleblower said, saying in their own words. Vindman himself, of course, was a witness to many of this, including the call. So, there's no place for them to hide, and they can't. It's going to be very hard for them to lie in public. So they're just going to have to make a lot of noise.
Evelyn Farkas, Mika Owyang, Wendy Sherman, thank you all for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.